There's a name for this in the world of psychology and the research literature. It's called CIS-sexism, or sometimes you'll hear it called CIS-normativity, right? This idea
I
that if
have
we do not
never heard of that.
we don't look in this certain way, which is cisgender passing, right? Whether we are a crossdresser, whether we are trans-identified and or a crossdresser, this idea of internalized cis-normativity or cis-sexism, that if we are looking somehow outside that gender box, that we are actually in danger, which in some cases might be true, but we're certainly in danger of being ostracized from our community.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Soul Kink Therapy. My name is Emily Letts. I am a therapeutic dominatrix based in Boulder, Colorado, and today we have the honor of welcoming Jennifer Vencill on the show. Jennifer Vencill is a psychologist, a certified sex therapist working in a medical setting, and also, drumroll please, co-author of one of the most interesting books that I've read this year, Desire. What's the tagline for Desire, Jennifer?
An inclusive guide to navigating libido differences in relationships.
Libido differences in relationships. Ugh, I feel like this is such a topic for literally every person on the face of the planet, especially our cross-dressing community. So welcome to the podcast, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me and the warm welcome.
Yay. Well, we've been trying to schedule this for a minute, and I'm honestly so happy it got rescheduled so many times because it gave me the opportunity to read the full book. And by read, I mean listen to. So, yeah, I'm so excited to dive in. So let's get started. Okay, so one of the first things that caught me when reading this book, especially with cross-dressers in mind, is the concept of how shame impacts libido.
Mm.
So a lot of cross-dressers, right, they are just normal men, right, identify as men, live in fathers, conservative areas, liberal areas all throughout in every form of society, construction workers, doctors, like everything. And then there's this part of their life that nobody knows about. Their partner may know about it, but often it's don't ask, don't tell. And one of the things that really caught me is just the depth of which you describe the impact of shame on a person's well-being, their intimacy, their libido, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. Also, this concept of a minority group and how that plays into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yeah, so my co-author, shout out to Dr. Lauren Fogel Mersy, my co-author of the book Desire. She and I talk a
Okay.
lot about shame and how that is also intertwined with lack of good comprehensive sex education. We really see those things going hand in hand.
Yeah.
We have good comprehensive sex education, we understand that there's quite a lot of diversity in terms of what turns people on, what people's fantasies are, what types of activity they desire in the bedroom, right? Not just how much desire they have, but what they have
Right.
desires for. And if we're not providing education about those things, if we're not normalizing the incredible diversity of human sexuality, shame is very commonly a result, right? Especially
Mm.
pre-internet, where people couldn't find other folks that shared their interests and their fantasies and their desires. It's a little bit easier these days to find these communities online, but even so, that's steeped in a lot of shame because um, as a culture, excuse me, we still are not really normalizing and validating that these are really common sexual interests, sexual practices, and behaviors, and identity related for many people as well, right?
Where does that shame, like, why? It's like, why does that shame come in? Why is that such a default experience for like so many people around this very human topic?
Yeah. I mean, we are social creatures at our core, right? As a species, we're social creatures. And so we do a lot to try to not be ostracized from other people, other humans, even when that's really hard. And so if we've heard our whole life cross dressing or having interest in this or having this type of fantasy is wrong, it's deviant, it's sinful, if we come out, so to speak, and start talking about those things, we run the risk of being ostracized from our family, from our community, church communities, even, right?
Yeah.
That's a huge threat for people, and understandably so. But if we're not again, if we don't have that education, it makes it more likely that people will stay closeted and feel shameful about these things. We talk in the book a lot about how not only is this about educating people with good comprehensive sex education, but it's also about talking about it. So podcasts like this, books like ours and others that talk about the diversity of human sexuality Having these conversations is part of breaking the shame and stigma because we're starting to talk about how common this stuff is.
Mhm. Yeah, and what is it about like, can you talk to me a little bit about, like, the mechanisms that shame and, like, the impact of shame on, like, a person's because I just feel like a lot of crossdressers are like, even when their partner is um, allowing it, quote unquote, right? Tolerating it. And so it's like, yes, this is a thing we both acknowledge. This like I'm so struck by sort of the tentacles of what
Mm,
shame has in all parts of their being. And I was just really impressed when you were talking about like yeah, once again the mechanisms of shame on sexuality and ability to be intimate, and then also, like, the impact on it, on in a relationship.
yeah, something I talk a lot about with my own sex therapy patients is that this does actually have a very real physiological, biological influence on us, or it certainly can, right? So, one of the mechanisms we talk about when there's shame or there's anxiety about sexual interest, sexual practice, sexual behaviors, when there's just shame and anxiety, we run the risk of triggering what's known as a sympathetic nervous system response. A lot of people will have heard of that referred to as the fight or flight response, fight, flight, or freeze.
Mhm.
And I often will talk with my patients in my office about, yeah, we think about having stressful thoughts and negative thoughts as a cognitive psychological process, and that's true. But when we're having really self negative, shame based thinking, it triggers a physical reaction in our body. We like to, in
Mhm.
Western cultures, pretend our brain and body are not connected, that they're different things. But
Mhm.
it's the body is the brain. They are not separate. And so when we're having these very negative, shame filled, anxiety filled thoughts, it can trigger that stress response, that fight or flight response. And from there, sexual functioning can be really challenging. It might be difficult to
Mm.
get arousal of the body, lubrication, genital swelling, erections. It's going to be really difficult to have orgasms and or ejaculation if we're in that sympathetic stress response. So there's a very real biological mechanism that can follow from those stressful kind of thoughts and those shame-based thoughts.
What about the impact of just being in connection? Because one of the things you talk about a lot is also like motivators into sexual connection, which I think a lot of people struggle with. They've been married for a long time.
Mm,
How do I how do I get my wife to even turn towards me, let alone as a man, let alone the thing that I really want, which is in my feminine form?
mhm. Yeah, we talk a lot about there's some interesting research on motivators for being sexually active, especially with a partner. And some of those motivators are the ones you would expect, right? It feels pleasurable. There's physical pleasure, there's orgasmic pleasure, those sorts of things. For other people, that motivation is more spiritual. For some, it's,
Mm,
doing this helps me fall asleep at night or relieves chronic pain, right? There are all sorts of reasons why people might be motivated to have sex with a partner or by themselves for that matter. And so
yeah.
starting to understand not only your own motivators for a sexual experience with a partner, but your partner's motivators is a really critical part of this conversation for people in relationships that are struggling with their sexual connection. If we don't have an understanding of our own and our partner's motivators, we're probably going to get stuck at some point, especially in longer term relationships where those motivators might change over time. That's very, very common.
I loved that you gave, like, this comprehensive I'm sure it's not comprehensive, but this long list of all of the motivators. Some of them were yeah, like, to fall asleep
Mhm.
or to like, co-regulate. You're stressed out, to co-regulate. There were just, like, a lot of them that I didn't even I was surprised by,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, or yeah, to soothe self-shame, you know what I mean? Or to there were just, like, so many of them that I was like, "Oh, of course
Yeah.
those course are those are motivators." It was so helpful.
And if we've never really stopped to think about it, like, yeah, it's not rocket science in some ways, but if we've never really stopped to think about it or self-reflect on our own motivators, much less our partner's motivators, yeah, we might get tangled up in that. I have a lot of patients sit across from me and sort of say, like, "I'm really motivated to have an orgasm. It feels good. Why doesn't my partner wanna do this more often like I do? Like, why isn't this so motivating for her the way it is for me? Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with them?" And I'm
Mhm.
saying, "Not everybody's motivated by orgasms, y'all. Like, That might sound
Right.
if you are somebody who's very motivated by having an orgasm and that feels good and you wanna pursue that more often, it might feel really weird and hard to believe that other people are not motivated by those experiences. The
Right.
complexity of human sexuality.
Which is then can cause so much frustration, and then if you don't have the tools or the skills to communicate authentically or, can just build into that sort of positive feedback loop.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, not to be a stereotypical therapist, but we gotta talk about these things.
Turns out
Communication isn't like 80% of the work.
spoiler alert, spoiler alert. I am curious, like, what made you wanna write this book? Like, what was the origin story for you personally?
Yeah, full credit to Lauren. This was my co-author. This was her brainchild for sure. She invited me
Mm,
out to dinner. This was years ago now. We went to the same fellowship together. We did a postdoc in human sexuality at the University of Minnesota. Shout out to that program. So
yeah.
we knew each other from there. We had gone out to dinner one night, and we were both kind of just talking about work and our frustrations about not having resources for folks that are struggling with libido, especially resources that are inclusive. Right? There are a bajillion books out there for cisgender women with low libido. That is not novel.
Yes.
There's lots of that information. We also see lots of cis men with low libido. I personally have built a sex therapy practice working with the queer and trans community, right? And so
Mm,
it's really not resources for these populations that are so dear to both of us, and of which we both belong to. And so we really wanted something that was going to be inclusive and something that we could sort of make sure represented the full diversity of humans that we work with in our sex therapy practices. And so it was, this idea to have both kind of a what are all the things that can impact one's libido, kind of an encyclopedia of libido was kind of the initial way of thinking about this book, and making sure that it was inclusive from the get-go. That was really
mm,
important for both of us. And so that kind of evolved, and as I think this is true for a lot of authors, like, as you get into the writing process, you start to kinda question your own ideas about things, and you're learning stuff as you go, as you're
mm.
really digging into the research literature. And so we've kinda changed some of the way we conceptualize about things, and I think the book has actually made me a better provider.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, reading it definitely makes me a different better practitioner. There's so many things that I didn't consider. In your so you say you work a lot with the queer and trans community. Is that
Yeah.
right? Do
Yeah.
you work do you work with cross-dressers or do you is that a population that, yeah, is in your office often?
Yeah, I wouldn't say so often these days, probably more historically when I worked in a different location, but certainly working with a lot of queer and trans patients as well for sexual functioning concerns. For my trans identified patients, that's usually in the context of medical, gender affirming medical care, hormone surgeries, those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah. And so but you have worked with cross-dressers, is that
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
What's something that you often hear or see working with these folks?
Yeah, I think the shame certainly stands out as we were talking about earlier. Um, I'm sure I'm not the only therapist in the world who has heard this, but had cross-dressing patients who've said, like, "I've never shared this with anyone else before. You're the first
Yeah.
person I've told." And so part of the therapeutic work is, are we, quote, unquote, "coming out to other people"? Are we bringing a partner into this? Maybe they're not partnered at the moment. So how do we navigate this within a relational context? That was a lot of the therapeutic work.
Right, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things that I'm shocked how often I also get encountered with. It's like you're the first person and which is kind of when somebody says that to you, it's almost like there was a before and there's an after for that person. And
Yeah.
like you get to be sort of this like pivotal moment in their life that happens within like 1 minute of time.
Yeah. It's such an honor and a privilege to hold that for people and to help support them when they decide what they wanna do with that moving forward.
Yeah, it is. It's like what you like they're gonna remember this moment forever. It's such a special time. Can you talk a little bit about can you talk a little bit about one thing that I really loved you listening to was the difference between responsive and spontaneous desire. And I get a thing I'm still just uh, I wanna give the folks who are listening the tool I wanna give the folks who are listening the teaser to go read your book, first of all, that's one of the main objectives, but I also wanna give them a little bit more of the lay of the landscape that they could be experiencing in their own relationships. And again, like, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to is like, I haven't been intimate with my partner for 10 years.
Mhm.
So my cross dressing is really the only resource of intimacy that I have in my life.
Yeah.
And no one knows about it. And I'm super stigmatized and I feel quite ashamed of it. But it's like, how do we give folks the tools to begin to turn towards their partner, especially when it's become fraught and they have this big secret underneath in the ground?
Yeah. I mean, certainly communication, 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 and sometimes that communication needs to be with support of a provider, right? A certified sex therapist, a marital relationship therapist of some kind, a coach of some kind, right? And so there might need to be professional support in those conversations. But to answer your initial question, Emily,
Yeah.
so I find that a lot of folks are not aware because we do terrible sex education in this culture.
Mm.
There are
It
actually
all goes back
yeah,
to the
we
same.
all kind of circle back
Yep.
to my soapbox about bad sex education,
Yeah.
that I will probably die on, right? But there are 2 different types of libido, and the sexual health, sexual medicine, psych therapy community has understood this for a long time, but it's not something, again, that we're educating the public about. We're not teaching this in high school education. We're not doing sex
Mhm.
at all, and so I will be meeting with 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, upwards of 90-something-year-old patients in my office and asking them, "Hey, did you know that there's 2 different types of libido, also known as sexual desire?" And they look at me like, "What? No, I've never heard
Mm.
before," right? Which
Mm.
because then I can be there and be like, "Yeah, this is what I consider foundational sex education that we all should have gotten probably at a much younger age, but here we are now, and we don't know what we don't know until we have somebody to assist us in that," right?
Get it, Jennifer, get it.
My soapbox, Emily. So there are 2 different types of libido. One is called spontaneous libido, one is called responsive libido, and they kind of sound like what they are, but just as a brief overview for your listeners, spontaneous libido is actually 2 different processes happening at the same time, but because it's kind of this whirlwind, I think about this as the lightning bolt moment of all of a sudden I'm horny, I'm turned on, I'm aroused, right? It's kind of spontaneous, hence the term. When this is happening, there are actually 2 processes happening. One is the physiological arousal, right? It's blood rushing to the genitals, it's tingly feelings in the genitals, it's maybe erection, lubrication, your heart rate goes up a little bit, right? Those physiological signs of sexual arousal. That's part
Mhm.
1. Part 2 is the mental piece. It's the wanting, right? That urge that we think about psychologically for folks. For those that are having spontaneous libido or spontaneous desire, we use those terms interchangeably, that's all happening at the same time. The mental arousal, the physical arousal, it's all happening together, right?
Got it. It's like yeah, it's a spontaneous, like, it's an Instapot. It's
Yeah,
just like, "Whoop, I'm
totally
horny.
legal.
What's up? Who's around? How do we
Yeah,
do that? Like, what's going on?"
and it might be triggered by something really obvious, like maybe you saw something on TV or you were, reading something, maybe, but that's not how everyone experiences it. Sometimes it just shows up in our brain and our
Mhm.
body, and we don't always know why.
I have some friends are like, "Road trips are interesting." Just like and I'm like, "What? That sounds amazing. I kind of wish I could have that experience." She was like my friend was just like, "Yep, road trips, you have to stop every once in a while to take care of yourself." And I was
That
like, "That
high
is not my
spontaneous
experience."
libido, yeah.
That's amazing.
When people come to a sex therapist's office, a sexual medicine clinic, and they say they have low libido or no libido, almost always, I don't think I've been proven wrong on this yet, but almost always they're referring to spontaneous libido, right? They're saying,
Oh,
having that urge, I'm not having that drive, even though that's kind of an incorrect term. That's the kind of language that we'll hear from clients or patients seeking care for libido concerns, right? I have low libido, I have no libido.
it's almost like we got implanted about what it was like to be horny when we were teenagers and then never updated that.
Some of it's because of our media, and I will often say this to the patients in front of me, right? Like, the reason why people are coming in saying, "This is my concern," is because they're looking at every show and every movie on streaming platforms and
Yeah.
every book we read where it is spontaneous libido that's represented, and that's not bad per se, that's great, right? As long as we
Mhm.
understand that that's not the only type of experience that people have, right? But
Great.
that's the part, we don't know what we don't know.
We don't know.
We're
Yeah.
looking at every streaming platform and every movie and every TV show and every book and magazine article we're reading, and all we're seeing represented is spontaneous libido, and that's not a common experience for us, or it's maybe never actually ever been an experience for us. We tend to sort of identify ourselves as deficit if that's what we're looking and seeing all around us.
I feel like this is especially common for men.
Mhm.
Like, the the idea that men have to have
Mm,
spontaneous libido, which is like anytime their partner is horny, they should be getting an erection.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's so deeply ingrained in how we think about masculinity in this culture, right? And the
which is
opposite is
also
true as well, like, women who have a lot of spontaneous libido and that's more of their prominent style, they're often shamed for that, right? They're slut shamed for that, typically.
right, that makes so much sense. It's also why I feel like there's so much shame around not being able to have an erection in
Yeah,
any moment in time. You're not a man
yeah.
for some reason because yeah, ugh, I hate it.
Yeah,
Okay.
all of these very inaccurate definitions and just, yeah, again, it's a lack of good education. And so that leads us very naturally to that second type of libido or desire called responsive libido, and
This is my favorite. When you started getting into
where I
it and
started with this, right?
yeah, when you started getting into it and naming all the things that make up a good, like, responsive, I was, like, writing them down. This is so good, it's so good. Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
so glad. Yeah, I think it resonates with a lot of people because a lot of people are more responsive in their style, but they never had that label, they never had that understanding, they never had that education. So it can be such a light bulb moment for a more generally responsive libido person, right? So to back up and define that, we talked about with spontaneous libido, it's the physiological arousal, it's the mental arousal, it's all kind of rushing around together in one big lightning bolt moment. For people who are more responsive in their style of libido, it's much more of a two-step process for them. Oftentimes,
Mm,
the physical arousal has to happen first, right? There needs to be some touching or something physical, some sort of pleasurable physical stimulus to get them going. And then the mind responds, right? That's why we call it responsive libido. So it's sort of body first and then brain. The brain responds to, oh, this is feeling good. I'm able to focus on the pleasure, right? I'm actually enjoying this. So let's continue, right? They might not
yeah,
really come to that sexual experience being like, I'm super horny in this moment. I'm having loads of spontaneous libido. But if the responsive libido can get going through pleasurable touch, through focusing, through time, we kind of go through several variables in the book about this,
yeah.
then that is often what people discover is kind of their main way of experiencing sexual desire. Very common, but not something that we see in the movies, not something we hear talked about very often, even though it's a huge chunk of our population that experience sexual desire in this way.
It's like getting I'm very responsive, but it's I talk to my partner about it. It's just like, "I need a warm up." Like,
Yeah.
"Warm me up, baby." Like, because also so much of my life, and I know a lot of men can and everyone can, is you're in such a doing mode. Gotta get things done. Like, you're very much, in the tantric relational space, we talk about, like, the masculine, which is, like, the awareness, the master of time and space.
Mm,
Doing, 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 doing. And then to pull the brakes to slow everything down, and it was like, "Now be erotic." It can be such a intense gear change that can not only be, disorienting to me, but it can cause a moment of, like, anxiety and threat in my body,
yes.
which is
Yeah.
then the opposite way of that I wanna go.
Mhm. There's
Which
that stress response that shuts everything down, right?
exactly, and then if I get into a place of, like, a cortisol spike, it takes even longer to warm me up and to calm me down, and so it's a
Yeah,
whole process. Does that sound about right?
that sounds about right. That is that sympathetic activation, right? It's that cortisol, that adrenaline that shuts our arousal down.
And so when I like, most people don't recognize, like, the warm up is so important and can take as long as it needs to take. Can you talk I know you kind of glanced over it, can you talk a little bit about the variables?
Yeah, so we generally identify 4 kind of requirements for responsive desire to happen. That is not to say that it's only 4 for some people, but 4 that must be there for everybody. Other people might have some additional requirements, so
Yeah.
with that in mind. The first is that there has to be willingness to engage, right? There has to be consent, in other words, right? So
Yeah.
you might be a more responsive desire person and say, well, it's really hard for me to get started with touch and kind of foreplay type of stuff if I'm not having spontaneous libido. So, how do I move from one space to another? And there's
Mm.
all sorts of conversations that we can have in sex therapy. The book talks about some of these interventions about how we go from one to the other. The idea here, though, is that in order to build responsive libido, responsive desire, you have to be willing to be touched, right? You have to be willing to engage in some way. That doesn't mean straight to the genitals. That doesn't mean we're going for an orgasm right away. It's a maybe we need to have that warm up with cuddling or kissing or just holding hands in some way, right? There has to be a willingness to engage.
Or just,
If
like,
you're not
emotional intimacy.
Yeah, if you're not actually willing to engage, your responsive libido is probably not gonna happen, right? Because 'Cause you're there doing what we often refer to as duty sex or sort of
Yes.
obligatory sex, right?
Turns out reluctance is not sexy.
It's also not gonna help you with responsive libido, like, those are not compatible things.
Yeah, so if you're reluctant in any way, shape, or form, you are sabotaging the experience. So you and addressing first you have to bring the reluctance to, like, not only to yourself, but to the partner so you could be with it together.
Yeah, and I wanna highlight that reluctance is often very, very valid. There's usually a good reason for it, right?
Yeah.
But those are things that we need to sort of address. Why is there reluctance? What's going on in the broader relationship, in the broader intimacy, emotional intimacy, not physical intimacy, that might need to be worked on first before somebody does feel willing to engage in this way, right? So that
Mhm.
willingness factor is huge. The second requirement for responsive libido is pleasure, right? We talked about for a lot of folks, they need that body kind of touch, that physical stimulus to get the responsive libido going, get that mental arousal going. But if it's just neutral, if you're like, it's fine, like I could take it or leave it, or if it actually hurts, and a lot of
Mm.
people are having painful sex that they should not be having, right? You're not gonna have good responsive libido. It's gonna be really challenging to experience responsive libido if sex is painful or if it's just kinda neutrally meh, right? It
Yeah.
actually needs to be pleasurable physical
I
experiences.
a teacher of mine always says just like, "No one wants sex that doesn't feel good." Like,
Right.
no one's gonna be motivated to do something that's not good. So it's
And
like,
there's a
turns
difference
out
here between, like, exploring, like, pain in a kink sense of that, so I wanna be really,
yes.
intentional about how I'm phrasing this.
Yeah,
For folks that are seeking kind of exploration of pain as pleasure, like, that's a different conversation altogether.
yeah.
This is unwanted, unexpected pain with sex, right? That is not gonna help your responsive libido.
Mhm. Mhm. Great. Okay, so we've got willingness to engage. We've got it's gotta be pleasurable in one way,
Very
shape, or
much so.
form. And it's also like the person like you are sovereign over your own pleasure. So that means it's
Mhm.
like only you really can say what is or is not pleasurable.
Yep.
And that assumptions on either part of what is or is not pleasurable turns out is not helpful.
Gotta talk about it, right?
You gotta actually yep, say the words. Okay, great. Those 2 things. What else?
Number 3 kinda circles back to what you were talking about earlier, it's focus, right? So, we could be very willing to engage, the touch could feel very physically pleasurable, but if we are all of a sudden thinking about, "What was that noise down the hall? My dog is scratching at the door. Oh, I need to return that phone call tomorrow," or, "Oh, shoot, I forgot to, like, pick that thing up at the grocery store." We are not going to have much, or it's going to be really challenging to experience responsive libido because our brain is literally not perceiving what our body's experiencing, right? We're distracted, we're not focused. And so
Mm.
this is where attention to mindfulness, if you're not familiar with kind of mindfulness practice, returning back to the present moment, this becomes a huge technique and a really, really evidence based positive intervention for folks that struggle with just sort of busy brain. Okay, how do I switch from my to do list to this erotic moment? How do I switch from all of the noises in my head and the busy life that we all live to having this intimacy in this moment and being present by myself or with my partner? How do I come back to the moment? Right.
This is something that I think is a huge issue that most people don't quite recognize because especially with crossdressers so much of their sexuality was based on porn
Mm,
or you know what I mean like external stimulators which then sort of they're not able to identify or be with the actual pleasure in their own body. Does that
yeah,
make sense?
it does. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and so so one of the things that I do with a lot of my clients is first just like building the vocabulary of presence of body, of even like my chest feel constricted, my there's tingling in my shoulders, like naming sensations and slowing down to be with them. I try to tell everyone I was like, what we're doing is setting you up for better sex. That is
Yeah.
where we're going. It might not feel like it right now, but that is where we're going is to build your capacity of pleasure in your own body.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree completely. And some of this is cultural, right? Especially in American culture. We're in this sort of hustle and grind thing. We don't slow
Yeah.
down. We're not encouraged to pay attention to our body. these kind of mindful interventions helping people just reconnect mentally to their physical experiences. A lot of times early on in these interventions, they're sort of like, what does this have to do with my sex life, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm paying attention to my breathing. What does this have to do with
Yes.
better orgasms or having more pleasure, right? And it has everything to do with that,
Everything.
as I hear you saying, right? It has everything to do with that. Because if we cannot present and mindfully connect with our physical experiences, all of this is gonna be so much more challenging and less satisfying.
Yeah, turns out if you're doing a to-do list in your head while having sex,
Oof,
not gonna be having a good time,
probably
generally.
not.
Probably not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got willingness to engage, we got pleasure, we got focus. Everyone meditate. If you're not meditating, meditate. Everyone
Time to start.
meditate.
And there's lots of different ways to do that, as I like to tell people, like, not every specific type of meditation is for everyone, so find the one that works for you, right? Whether it's a moving meditation, whether it's deep breathing, whether it's guided imagery, like, find the type that works for you.
A YouTube video,
Mhm.
guided, absolutely, love that. Okay, and what's the last one?
Number 4 is time, right? And it works kind of in a couple of ways, right? So we need to have enough time for responsive libido to build, right? To
Mm.
kind of respond, if you will. So we could be very willing to engage. It could feel really pleasurable. We could be very focused, very mindfully present in that moment. If it's only lasting for 30 seconds, we're probably not gonna get enough time
Yeah.
to build, right? And that amount of time differs for everyone, and it might differ depending on external factors, right? How tired are you? How stressed are you? How long does it take you to get mindfully focused and to present, right? So it interacts with those other 3 variables kind of in an opposite way, right? The more distracted you are, the less focused you are, right? The more time it's gonna take you to build responsive desire, if it happens at all, right? So it has this interaction with those first 3 requirements as well.
Yep. I'm a big fan of, like, saying urgency is not sexy unless it is sexy.
Yeah,
Unle
and generally, like, a quickie, right, is
Yeah.
typically for most people coming out of, like, everyone's having a lot of spontaneous libido in that moment, right? If you're somebody who's more responsive, quickies might be a harder thing for you. It might not be a very enjoyable thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is the practice that I have with my partner. It's just like we schedule a date because we're both responsive. We have a weekly, generally weekly date. We put like 2 hours on the calendar.
Love that.
And it is, and I know you talk about, like, intimacy dates too in the
Mhm,
book, but 2 hours on the calendar where it's just like our job is to shut our phones off and just be with each other and
mhm.
move towards pleasure in whatever way that looks like. And
I love that.
we explore with kink, we explore all kinds of different things, but because one of the things that I've really come to recognize is that having a thriving sexual connection is a uh, it is a skill.
Yeah, it absolutely is, especially in long-term relationships, right? When we have, the dopamine burst, that honeymoon time has passed us, that usually lasts maybe 6 to 12 months, depending on the couple, right? When that fades, the more responsive libido person is going to sort of emerge, right? If that is your main style of libido. A lot of people that are more responsive in their libido experience spontaneous libido. Typically, that's usually early on in their relationships when we've got all that dopamine flying around, right? So if responsive libido is more of your default, that will eventually emerge if you're with somebody for a longer amount of time.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you, I just had this amazing partner. She's a wife of a crossdresser
Mm,
on the last episode, and she was talking about, like, the moment there's an experience that a lot of crossdressers have where it's just, like, the first time if their partner, welcomes and, like, "Yes, okay, this is new. Let me meet this version of yourself," and they might come
totally.
out dressed. There's an experience of, as Anna Woods described it as, that's possible and that she was afraid of would happen with her partner, but it didn't, which is the ick.
Mhm.
Which is just like, your partner who's a man and you've had a sexual experience with as a man, and all of a sudden you imagine them as a woman or in woman's clothing,
Yep.
or you see them as a woman, and the fear that everyone has, and I'm sure the partner as well, the female partner is like, am I gonna be repulsed?"
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, I just wanna validate that that's real. I wish this is something we had more research around, that we had more of a scientific conversation so I could, like, bring data to this conversation, but the reality is we don't.
Right.
That's very real for some folks, and I think the hard truth is not everybody's attracted to femininity or performances of femininity, so there is a very real risk of there just not being an attraction there to that.
Mhm.
Certainly, that's not true for everyone's partner, of course, in the cross-dressing community or even in like the trans femme community as well. Similar worries with transition there. And that is a hard reality. The way that I would really encourage a partnership to handle this is to have a lot of these discussions before that first kind of big reveal, right? To
Mhm.
at least lay some of these fears out on the table and talk about maybe we do this a bit at a time. Maybe it's not the full big reveal. Maybe it's a small bit at a time. We kind of baby step. If we do, I mean, essentially exposure therapy at that point,
That's what
right?
I was just
We
thinking, yeah.
we minimize the risk of that huge, big, "Oh my gosh," right? That repulse, like, ick kind of sensation. That's much more likely to happen when we surprise people, right?
That exposure therapy, that's exactly building the window of tolerance.
Mhm.
And especially and what I've found is especially if you are responsive libido, which I mean, just like so many people are, it's almost like you can start to and this is definitely what I've found with partners, you can start to it's almost like following one thing that feels good and
Mhm.
like, okay, well, the visual representation still disorientates, but if I close my eyes, do you know what I mean? And I all of a sudden there's a leg here with pantyhose on it. Pantyhose, this is an interesting sensation. Okay.
That could be a positive feeling, right?
Yeah, the positive, but like following the pleasure anywhere. It could be like a desert island of pleasure, no pleasure anywhere, but then there's just like one green sprout
Mhm.
is somewhere between some rocks. Like, can you go to that sprout and hang out for a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, we
similar?
build it up slowly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but, my curious is, like, why the ick? Like, what is the ick? Like, do you have
Depends on the person. That's a hard question to answer because it's different for everybody.
'cause it seems because I'm just thinking about it seems like, you know what I mean, like the ick we might have towards a snake, or the ick towards we
Mhm.
have towards, like, vomit or feces or things that we're biologically wired to be repulsed by. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or disgusted by? I'm wondering if there's anything there of you know what I mean? To see if you're heterosexual and have been trained to only look at the masculine form as attractive, all of a sudden, the idea of being like, having to the obligation to be intimate with you know what I mean? A man in a what you see as a man in a woman's wig or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting to kinda hear how you phrase that question, right? Because you ask about or kinda talk about, is there a biological piece of this? And then you use the word training, right? And those are different things. We
Mhm.
don't have evidence to suggest that this is a biological repulsion, so I wanna be really
Mm,
clear that that doesn't
that's
exist that I'm aware of. What we
important.
do have is a lot of cultural training about what's, quote, unquote, "supposed to be attractive to us," right? There's a lot of sociocultural influence to all genders about what is an ideally attractive person.
Mhm.
That's built into us from a pretty young age, right?
Right.
Especially if we are in more conservative or more traditional environments, what's allowable in terms of attraction, what's allowable in terms of flexibility and fluidity with gender and playing with gender, um, that is not commonly in our culture something that we see a lot of people getting permission to feel attracted to or feel playful around. And so
Mhm.
to me, where we do have certainly some evidence is to suggest that there are sociocultural influences for the ick factor here.
That makes a lot of sense. It kind of reminds me, in my 20s, I was very much like, "Men are so hard to date. Man, I wish I could be a lesbian." Like, I remember thinking that, and then I started getting into reproductive justice work where there was only women around me and also only queer women around me, and I was introduced to this whole 'nother world, and I was like, "Man, could I be queer? Like, could I do" and I just started really asking myself, "Could I do that? Wouldn't it be great if I could do that?" 'Cause I would love to be, like, in a relationship with a woman, and then spontaneously, after, like, a year and a half of, like, really being immersed in that culture, I ended up falling in love with the woman and dated her for 4 years. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
When you allowed yourself to feel those attractions, right?
I allowed myself, absolutely, and I exposed myself
Mhm.
to that world and the possibility of it.
Yeah.
So it's like I almost wanna give this as, like, a shout out to, like, women, any partners on this who are listening to this of just, like, there's a whole world out there if you allow yourself to explore. Or men, like, they like, it doesn't have to be so like, the idea that it's so genetically or evolutionarily encoded within you.
Yeah. And in fact, the biology would support the opposite, right? If we look at other species, there is gender
Mm,
fluidity or sex fluidity, if you will. There is fluidity in terms of who animals, fish are pairing with, right? It's not always what we might think of as like heterosexual.
yeah.
There's actually been a couple of really great books written about this topic about how we see quote unquote queerness, which of course is a human construct in some ways, but how we see that in the animal kingdom, in the fish kingdom, in the amphibian kingdom, right? Humans are not exempt from that biology. We too
Yeah.
actually innately have quite a bit of flexibility if we are in an environment that allows for that without threatening to ostracize us from our communities.
That makes a lot of sense, I love that. So I wanna switch gears a little bit, and I wanna talk about one of the things that I really appreciated was you describing how the impact of, body dysmorphia or, like, shame that you have around your body can impact, um, your ability to be intimate.
Mhm.
And the reason I'm saying this is because a lot of a lot of men experience gender dysphoria,
Yeah.
even if they do really identify as cross-dressers and they don't have any desire to transition. But I'm curious, or even, like, their body dysmorphia, which is, like, not enjoying or liking the body that you have,
Mhm.
how that can impact capacity and ability to be intimate. And one of the things I just wanna note is spectatoring because I love that word, and I now
Yeah.
use it all the time.
A really classic dates back to Masters and Johnson, I believe, so that's not
Yeah.
Lauren and I's term, that's kind of a classic sex therapy concept. Spectatoring, for your listeners, being the concept that when we are sexual by ourselves or with a partner, that we sort of become the spectator of ourselves, so we're sort of, in some ways, hovering above ourselves, watching ourselves and judging our performance and seeing whether we measure up to whatever standard we're trying to hold ourselves against. Typically, that's not really helpful for people's sexual experience.
Somehow, I don't know why that doesn't seem like it would be real juicy for the
And so a lot
eroticism.
can roll into spectating. It might be sort of body dissatisfaction, dysmorphia, dysphoria, appearance anxiety. So there's kind of a spectrum of dissatisfaction with body image and appearance, of course. So it might be that that's kind of feeding into the spectating of like, how do I look? I wish I could dim the lights, or I want to cover this body part with a sheet, right? So those are
Yeah.
versions of spectating that can show up around body stuff. Spectating might also be about performance, right? Like, is my partner bored? Am I going to come soon? Like, is my erection hard enough? Right. So, spectating can take a lot of different forms, but body stuff is a common way that that comes up, appearance anxiety of some form. And it gets back to what we were talking about earlier. When we are in our head in that way,
Mm.
what we're also running the risk of doing is triggering that fight or flight sympathetic stress response in our brain and body, right? And if we trigger that, we have a flood of cortisol and a flood of adrenaline, and we have all these physiological changes, none of which are supporting sexual functioning, right?
Again,
Like
curious, so
a,
curious why that is.
a bear comes wandering into the bedroom, right? You go into this sympathetic stress response. You're not going to look at that bear and say, hold on, we'll be right with you. We're just going to finish here. Let us finish our pleasurable experience. Absolutely not. This is a
Right.
survival instinct. This is lizard brain, kind of deep brain stuff for us. And it's often so automatic that we don't realize it's happening.
Yeah. It's wild to think about because I have had, eating disorders and body dysmorphia that I've worked on so hard, but I definitely know the experience of being in an intimate situation with a partner and then all of a sudden just like floating outside of the
Mm,
experience and being like, "Oh no, is my role, is he seeing my body, like
yeah.
my body role or something like that?" And
Mhm. Of
and then watching that just shut down my ability to be present with him and to be able to receive pleasure.
course. Yeah.
And I love the idea of, like, y people don't have this idea that, like, the experience of body dysmorphia or not liking your body in whatever shape or form it is, because all bodies are good bodies,
Mhm.
um, is is basically you walking around with a bear chasing you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Chronically.
chronically. Being chased by a tiger chronically. 'Cause a lot of
Mhm.
people I don't think recognize that, like, when we have this was a huge deal for my own body coming back into my body, was recognizing that, "Oh, it's not me, it's them." Right?
Mm.
The reason I hate my body is not my fault, because I've spent my whole life thinking it's my fault. It's I am deficient because I have a role or weigh this or whatever, but it's actually not my fault, it's their fault, and when I say them, I say media, I say, like, all patriarchy, I say, like, all of the societal things.
I'm nodding emphatically. Yes, absolutely. No baby is born hating its body, right? These are
Right.
cultural, societal influences. No toddler is born hating its body. These are things that are taught to us as we grow.
That's exactly it, and so, like, l let the bear go, guys, we don't, because it's like, the idea that somebody who identifies as fat can have amazing, gorgeous, regular, euphoric, like, 10-hour sex sessions with, like, their partner or multiple partners, for me is, like, such a dynamic shift, was such a huge shift in my understanding of how I was allowed, like,
Yeah.
to think. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
also recognizing, like, having people identified as fat in my life and recognizing they're having more and better sex than I am having. When
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking my whole job is to be thin so I can have better sex or have partners, it's like,
It's a lie.
way to tickle.
It's a
Something
lie.
is off.
I'll never forget, this was years ago, and I can share this confidentially here, but I'll never forget, a cisgender heterosexual couple that I was working with forever ago, and she had had several children, they had been together a long time, and she had a lot of appearance anxiety, she had gained weight, she had kind of what she called the mom bod, right?
Mhm.
And wasn't feeling her best self, and it really got in the way of their intimacy. She would
Yeah.
be very distracted during partnered sex, she would be spectating a lot. "What does my body look like? I wanna dim the lights." Very, very common experiences. When we brought her spouse, her husband, into the session, they were able to start having some discussions about what does he find attractive because she could not believe for the life of her that he would find her body it was not at its
Mhm.
thinnest because she was a mom and in her 40s, et cetera, et
Because
cetera.
she gave life into this world.
Yeah, which is freaking incredible.
Incredible.
She learned from him that when he would self-stimulate, he would occasionally watch porn that was focused on mom bods. That's actually a category you can search for, by the way.
Ah.
And this blew her mind that when they were not sexual together, he was actively searching for folks that had similar body styles as her because that's what he found freaking attractive.
Mm. I have goosebumps.
Amazing, right?
I love
Amazing.
it.
And it still took her a while to sort of internalize that, of course, after decades of being told you're ugly, you're fat, your body shouldn't look this way, right? It takes a while to undo some of that cultural damage, especially for women and feminine people in this culture. Men are not exempt from that, of course, but it's certainly more culturally geared towards feminine folks.
And one of the reasons I wanted to bring this up is because this is just something that I hear a lot, which is like, okay, a crossdresser, they're like, get the bravery up, they're going to start exploring, and they can have these own experiences with themselves, right? And a lot of times it's self stimulation, it's, experiencing the clothes, the silk for themselves, but no one knows it. And then the idea of going out in public or introducing it to other people, all of a sudden, it's almost like they suck in all of the misogyny of that they might not have experienced as a man because they're like, "Whatever, my body's just my body. I don't really care about it as much." But then all of a sudden, when they try to be attractive, they're like, "Oh, I don't pass," or, "Oh, my have too much belly fat or my shoulders are too big," which then like the whole instead of being able to enjoy the thing that they feel privately, like shuts them down and creates a lot of fear around enjoying it in a more integrated way.
Yeah, there's a name for this in the world of psychology and the research literature. It's called cis-sexism, or sometimes you'll hear it called cis-normativity, right? This idea
I
that if
have
we do not
never heard
look
of that.
if we don't look in this certain way, which is cisgender passing, right? Whether we are a crossdresser, whether we are trans-identified and or a crossdresser, um, this idea of internalized cis-normativity or cis-sexism, that if we are looking somehow outside that gender box, that we are actually in danger, which in some cases might be true, but we're certainly in danger of being ostracized from our community.
I am that is so thank you. Thank you so much for that. I can't believe I didn't know that word. Yeah, and also it, like, shuts down their exploration,
Mhm.
not only for themselves, but also with their partner who might be on the other side of it. Because I've talked to so many partners who are like, "He didn't tell me till" this is Anna Wood's story, who on the last podcast, "He didn't tell me till 8 years into our marriage."
Yeah,
8 years. I've been living with this man every single day, loving him to the
yeah.
best of my ability, and he has been keeping this from me.
And that can feel like such a betrayal, not because of the cross-dressing, but because, "Oh,
Yes.
I thought I knew all the things," right? I thought we had shared some of our deepest things with each other, right? It's a betrayal because of the secret, not because of the activity.
Right. Yeah, and so, I mean, it's so interesting because we go from a conversation of talking about the ick, which I'm sure is, like, so terrifying for a cross-dresser or for someone
Yeah,
who's, gender exploring. So that is a real possibility, and also, like, for you to think that you have to pass or to think that you have to look like, an attract like, you're living up to some standard and
yeah,
that it is constipating the very reason why you started this beautiful internal exploration. That
yeah.
don't make no sense either.
Yeah, this is cis-normativity, transphobia, they're 2 sides of the same coin.
Yeah. So it's a tricky thing to it's just like, how do I make sure I don't give her the ick? And also, how do I make sure that I don't spectate her and then sabotage the whole thing?
Yeah, baby steps is the only way that I know how to do that successfully, right? We gotta do baby steps.
And
And that can
also
be hard if you're the person that's like, "I'm so excited, like, I'm finally at a point where I'm really excited to share this. I'm, like, ready. I wanna throw it all out there." And we're saying, "Well, that's awesome, and we still might need to slow down a little bit," right?
this is the other thing I hear a lot. It's like the pink fog. Have you heard of this
Mm,
term?
yes.
Yeah, which is just like, "Oh my gosh, she said it's okay, like, let's go shopping, let's do our nails, and then let's dress me up as a maid and get pecked."
Yeah,
It's like, well, wait a minute, we actually have to no matter how accepting your partner is, you have to do some exposure therapy to build
yeah,
the
especially if this is new information for that. You might have been sitting with this your entire life,
mm,
right? Years and years and years, but if this is brand new information for them, you've had a head start, right?
a huge head start. That's exactly it. And also what I'm just really struck by doing the work to reintroduce yourself to your body.
Yeah, yeah.
What are some tips that people can do that? And just if you wanna explain, uh, that concept a little bit more.
Yeah, in the sex therapy world, you'll often hear this referred to as body mapping. That's an exercise that we will have folks do.
Yes.
Sometimes it's genitally focused, but more often it really is the full body that we're trying to map, like literally from top of your head to your tip of your toes. And we have people typically start by themselves, right? You might do this with a partner later on, but starting on your own helps you to sort of reestablish that relationship with your body, especially if there's been age related changes, medical related changes, right? Like our bodies, if we're lucky and privileged to live long enough, they're not going to look the same as they used to. They're not going to feel the same as they used to. And that's a privilege of getting older. And it is essentially a mindfulness based exercise, right? So using your hand, can you touch different areas of your body again from head to the tip of your toes? You might not do that all in one session, but starting to explore, what do I notice? What sort of physiological sensations? Is it warm? Is it soft? Is it hairy? Is it smooth? Is it hot or cold? What sort of tactile sensations do you notice? Is there any sort of pleasure to it? We talk about, positive, negative, neutral. Lots of stuff is just going to be neutral when you touch that area of your body. You're like, "Huh, it's not bad. It's not good. It's just kind of fine, right?" Does it bring up any positive, negative, or neutral thoughts for you, right? So you might get to a certain area of touching in your body mapping exercise and it triggers all sorts of body shame kind of stuff, dysmorphia stuff, right? Appearance anxiety kind of stuff. That's notable. We might need to bring that to therapy, right? So starting to kind of map out from head to the tip of our toes, What do we like? What do we not like? What are we actually physiologically sensing when we touch this area of our body? That's really important information for kind of reintroducing yourself to your own body as it shifts and changes over time, but also so that you can potentially talk to your partner about what you've experienced and what you've discovered.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes me really recognize and honor how exploring cross-dressing for a lot of men is the experience of body mapping,
For
is the
sure.
experience of reintroducing themselves to their body. Because
For
all of
sure.
a sudden, I've talked to some people where it's just like they shave their legs for the first time. Actually, my Aki Lalani, I'll quote him in this. He shaved his who's my co-facilitator for this cohort outrageously her I'm launching, but he shaved his legs for the first time and then put them in his sheets, to go to bed. And like literally had a freak out because it was so beautiful. It was like butter. He describes it as like dipping his legs into a vat of like
Yeah.
silky butter. And he
Mhm.
got to like literally it's a reintroduction of the capacity of pleasure in in their bodies.
Yeah, and a new sensation oftentimes, right?
Yeah, and so it just opens up a whole world.
That's super
Wow.
exciting.
It's so exciting. This is why I keep coming back to like cross-dressing is a resource for
Yeah.
so many people. It is a resource and I talk about resources resources just anything that brings you more calm, peace, pleasure, like anything that's like better than it was before.
Yeah.
Like and cross-dressing is that, and so we need to bring that to the light. Well, I wanna, wrap up because I know we're at time, but I just wanna thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for your work.
Thank you.
I think it's so important, especially the inclusivity of this book, how you include different, people's, like, types of names and different relationships and gender norms. It goes through everything from libido if you have cancer, libido with aging, libido with hormones, libido with transitioning. And it's just such a valuable resource that I'm sure has impacted so many people.
Thank you. That means a lot. I mean, especially the inclusivity piece, that's always the hope, and we never wanna forget anyone. You also can't fit everyone into a 250-page book, so it's really meaningful that it stood out to you.
Yeah. So, if anyone would like to find your work or find this book, how do we find you and look more into your stuff?
Socials are probably the easiest way, so I'm on Instagram at Dr. Jennifer Vencill, and you can pick up Desire, the book, both in paperback or hard copy at any bookseller, retailer online or in brick and mortar stores. There's also audiobook and ebooks available as well.
That's amazing. And that's Vencill, right?
Correct.
Jennifer Vencill. Okay. Well, thank you again, Jennifer, for all your work. And thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of Soul King Therapy.